I rested my arms behind my head, skim reading the credits of a movie I'd just watched. After seeing them through about halfway, I lifted myself from the sofa and walked to the kitchen, stretching my arms out above me. I opened the fridge door and found a full carton of juice. So I sat down on the kitchen table by the window, cracked open the lid, and took several long, noisy gulps. When I couldn't drink any more, I gasped to let in new air and wiped my mouth on my back of my hand. My evenings were uneventful around this time in the summer. It was 9:15 p.m. on a Sunday in July. School was out for the holidays, and my parents had gone to visit my aunt and uncle who lived by the coast. They would still be gone for 2 more weeks. I declined the invitation to join them. I didn't dislike the place or my relatives, but we usually stayed there so long that I'd miss out most of summer break, and I'd truthfully rather spend it with my friends in town. I was a good kid who never knew how to wash clothes and use an oven, and generally not an idiot, so they let me stay at the house so long as I keep it clean. As I sat, I looked out in the garden to check for anything scary in the dark. It was empty and black. I kind of wished we had a pet. A dog or a cat would be nice now, but their hair always made me sneeze and my eyes go red and itchy. With that in mind, my dad said no, even though I wouldn't mind it. It was 9:22 p.m. I put the rest of the juice carton back in the fridge door and went back over to the window. Hoisting myself up onto the counter again, I glanced out to the garden and identified the shadows, one by one, to make sure everything was in its place. The bushes were in their usual shape. 2 small trees stood together by the back fence, and a metal table with 4 chairs sat casually on the patio. I like to check these things, which is largely why I wasn't scared of the dark. I would always get up to investigate small noises in the night, and I hated sleeping with my face to the wall. If somebody was in my room at night, I'd rather know about it, so at least there was a faintest chance of getting away somehow. This meant that my worries were quickly put to rest, as I either found nothing downstairs but the radiator pumping with the heat, or opened my eyes to see an empty bedroom. Not knowing what could be making the odd noises coming from the kitchen, or the stairs, or my room, which is what makes my skin creep. 9:30 p.m. I got down from the counter and wandered back into the living room to turn off the TV and decided to take the rest of the juice upstairs. I went back into the kitchen, opened the fridge door, and stopped. Turning my head to focus outside, I could see someone standing in the garden. I shut the fridge door and turned off the light, so they couldn't see me so easily. I moved slowly to lean on the kitchen counter to get a better look. All the doors were locked, and the neighbors were home. I took a moment to remind myself this. Still, my heart quickened a bit, just as I stood there straining to see his or her shape in the darkness at the end of the garden. I had to keep glancing away to keep their fuzzy outline clear in my vision. They were standing very still and were a little thin, but that's all I could see. I couldn't tell anything else. Oh, it was the garden umbrella leaning up against the back fence. I forgot we used to have it for barbecues. I smiled at myself, pleased that I didn't get too worked up, and went upstairs to my bedroom. I laid on the bed and propped my head up on a pillow, opening my laptop on my stomach to see if anybody was online. Apparently, someone else was bored and saw my name pop up. Bonjour! Hey, you okay? Yeah, bored. Are your parents still away? For a couple more weeks. Why don't I come around? I don't want to be rude, but I kind of can't be bothered to hang out tonight. Thanks, though. I know what you mean. It's cool. What about tomorrow? Yeah, that sounds better. Cool. I'll be around about 1. I've got some family stuff to do in the morning. Okay. Do you still have a tent, by the way? We could camp out in the garden or something. Aw, slumber party. I love you too, bro. Whatever, lol. You got the tent though, right? Yeah, somewhere. Let me check first. BRB. I got up from the bed and headed to check the cupboard under the stairs. I didn't know where the tent was, but it seemed a good place to start. I opened the cupboard door and started shifting coats aside. Some cardboard boxes were stacked up at the back and might be hiding it. So I started unstacking them. I took out a couple of the easy-to-reach ones and had a stroke of good luck as the tent bag came into view. I leaned over to the other boxes and picked up the bag and took the big garden umbrella that sat beside it too, just in case it rained tomorrow. I paused. I put the tent down. It took me a couple of seconds to get back to the kitchen window and focus on the darkness outside. My eyes weren't yet adjusted to the dark, so I couldn't see all the way back to the fence. Turning off the kitchen light, I leaned on the counter and continued staring at the same point. The other garden features began to fade into view one by one, fitting my previous mental image. I wasn't sure what I wanted to see. The darkness gave way to familiar forms I knew, but after a while, I stood there for 15 minutes looking at it. I couldn't tell its shape properly, but it did look like someone standing there. I decided it didn't seem like a threat. I thought if I was in any real danger, I would have been a lot more worried by now. That thought kept me calm, but I also wanted to find out what it was. I couldn't stand there forever. I jogged upstairs, picked up my laptop, and brought it down with me to the counter. Could you come round now? Oh? Yeah, I think I see someone in my garden. What is it? An animal? No, it's tall. I thought it was an umbrella. And now you're sure it isn't? I don't know. I thought it was someone, but now I'm sure it's not a person. It just looks weird, and I don't think it was there before. Before when? I don't know. Earlier today, maybe? I can't remember. Are you scared? I'd feel better if someone else was here. Well, I did offer to come around, and I am bored. So, yeah? Yeah, I'll come soon. Cool, thanks. Just use the front gate. I sat there watching the black shape lean against the fence for another 10 minutes. Eventually, the doorbell rang. I opened it up, and Chris ran in, and bear hugged me. It's been too long, Chris mocked, cried. Yeah, it must have been a whole day, I retorted, smiling. The torment, he replied, pretending to ignore me. Look, come over here, I said, pushing him off and walking to the kitchen. I switched off the light and pointed in the figure's direction. Look. Give me a sec, said Chris. I can't see properly. A minute later, he noticed. That black thing? Yeah. We both stood there, looking at it for a while. I half expected it to be gone. When he looked, he leaned over to the counter. It's a big plant thing or a plaque of wood or something. Anyway, let's go watch TV. Will you check with me to make sure? Do you have a torch? No, I admitted. Well, we could check if we keep the kitchen light on and open the back door a little, he offered. I thought for a second and agreed, but said we should stay right by the house. We slipped on our trainers and opened the back door, stepping into the patio. I felt the air was heavy and warm that night. Chris walked behind me. we stood very close to the door, peering at the black fence. "Should we?" I had just started to speak when he quickly stepped into the house again, still looking at the fence. "What?" I asked, following him in. I turned and realized that the figure was gone. It was obvious from the light coming from the back door that the fence and the rest of the garden was just as it always was. "Where is it?" Chris said. "If it was leaning against the fence, it probably fell over into a bush or something." I tried to convince us both. We stared at it for a few seconds longer and decided that we were too nervous to go and check. I don't usually give in to my night terrors, but now they were just beginning to click into my head. Can you stay over for the night?" Yeah, sure." It didn't sound like he really wanted to. He kept his eyes on the fence. We both went inside and locked the door before going up into my room. I got out a sleeping bag for Chris and drew the curtains without looking outside into the garden again. We talked about stupid stuff for a couple of hours to take our minds off the garden and fell asleep. In the morning, I found Chris's sleeping bag empty. I called out to Chris and he said he was downstairs, so I threw on a t-shirt and went down. "Sleep well?" I asked. Yeah, pretty well, but I kept thinking about the garden and stuff." "Hey, did you find that tent?" he returned. Yeah." Remembering the shape, which I had forgotten about until now. "Well, I was thinking about the camping thing, and I thought maybe we could bring the tent into my house. It would make just a change, you know?" I didn't have to ask him why. I wasn't too keen on staying in my garden after last night. Wait, last night? Come to think of it, the sun was up and I wanted to go check the garden while it wasn't pitch black. I asked Chris, and he hesitantly agreed. We talked as we filled a couple of rucksacks with sleeping bags and some food from the kitchen. We didn't want to set up a fire, so we packed some tinned hot dogs, bread, a packet of tomatoes, and chocolate, as well as some bottles of water. "There's a forest next to my house, which is actually pretty cool," Chris explained. "Our garden backs into the edge of it. I stayed in a tent there once with my dad for our first camping trip when I was about 7. I remember I was so excited at the time. I thought we were really roughing it, like some hardcore mountaineers." Chris laughed at himself. "If we get too cold or need more food, we can just go to my house. My parents are out, so we'll just have free ruin of the place anyway." "Yours are away too?" "It's the anniversary, so they'll be out for tonight. They're staying in the hotel and next town over. They'll be back in the morning." Apparently leaving your kids behind is the fashion of the summer. At about noon, we left my house with the 2 rucksacks, a sleeping bag for each of us, and the tent, and made our way to Chris's house. It was fairly close by and a part of the same pleasant neighborhood. We talked and joked a lot, walking side by side, nodding and greeting a couple of familiar neighbors as we went. It was a crazy nice day. The sun was almost too much. It was hot on our necks, and the trees by the sidewalk seemed to glow green from underneath as the sunlight passed through the leaves. A sprinkler offered us some water as we walked by one house, and it felt good on my hot arms. I was already sweating by the time we got to Chris's place. We hadn't been walking for more than 20 minutes. We didn't go inside his house immediately because it was so hot. We went straight to his garden and dumped our bags in the shade. He wasn't joking. The gate of his garden backed straight into an impressive forest. Very tall, thin trees stood high above the house and continued as far as I could see. Some bushes and shrubs littered the forest floor, but most of it was either grass or fairly smooth sections of dirt. I didn't see how this forest was classed as small. "Looks good, right?" he boasted. "It's awesome." I admitted, opening the gate and surveying the area. I walked out in between the trees and found a flat spot for the tent. I turned around to ask Chris's opinion and paused, a little disappointed. It didn't feel like real camping when his house was so obviously in our faces. Let's go a little further so it at least feels legit, I said and walked back to pick up my bags. Chris objected to carrying his heavy shit and further. We walked in a straight line from Chris's house and kept checking behind us until the house was just about obscured by the trees in front of each other. We had only gone a very short way, but the forest was already thicker and greener. There was even a long rope swing hanging from one of the trees, but it looked too old to hold our weight, so we decided to keep our spines unbroken and give it a miss. I unpacked the tent and set it up with Chris's help, and we threw our sleeping bags inside. I laid down inside to test it out. It was warm and humid. I had to adjust my breathing for a second. I stepped out again and asked Chris if he had a torch for the evening. "I can do it better than that," was his response, and he took off towards the house. I was too hot to run after him, so I opened my rucksack and cracked open a bottle of water, downing half of it and putting the rest back in the pack. I laid down on a patch of grass and looked up at the canopy. The leaves were shifting gently in the breeze. I couldn't feel from down here. And I watched them sway and mesh together until I heard Chris's return. "Did you get a torch?" I asked, closing my eyes. The sun shone through my eyelids and colored my vision red. I listened to the soft sound of his footsteps on the grass as he walked past me towards the rope swing. "That's not gonna hold you," I warned as I heard him tug the branch with a small creak. He tugged it and it creaked in response. I listened. He tugged it once more and again. There was a moment of silence as I guessed he was still weighing it up. And another tug. He continued to tug a few more times, and the creaking followed each one. I was sure it wouldn't hold his weight, and I smiled, predicting one big creak and a snap as the rope or the branch broke. I waited as some final tugs were made. I waited still. "Yo!" I heard Chris's voice coming from his garden. I sat bolt upright, almost spraining my neck as I snapped my head sideways to face his house. He was jogging through the trees holding an electric lantern. I switched my gaze in the other direction, towards the rope swing. It was hanging still, nothing nearby. I stood up and turned full circle, nothing in any other direction. "What?" I mouthed to myself. Walking towards the rope, I tugged it gently. It didn't creak. I pulled it harder. It didn't creak. My mouth went dry. I jumped up, grabbed hold, and yanked it down. The branch bent a little as my feet touched the floor, and still it did not make a sound. I kept hold of it as it stared upwards towards the branches, but eventually the rope gave way under my weight, somewhere in the middle, and a soft thud fell on my ears as a thick rope fell in front of me. Chris was rattling the lantern as he came by. "I never used this before. Got it for Christmas from my cousin. Buy some weird presents." "I see the swing is dead. Let's give a proper burial in the memory of old the joy it gave us." I didn't respond. I continued to look up the branch with half a rope swing tied to it. "Hey, are you good?" Chris followed my gaze. "I thought you already came back," I said immediately. I wasn't the type to let things slide with an, "Oh, it's nothing." "What?" he replied. Someone walked by me and was messing around the rope swing. Who was it? I don't know. Are they still around? I don't know. I had my eyes closed and was just laying there. I pointed, but then I heard you shout, so I looked around and there was nothing there. I heard them by my head. I felt a bit sick. "Look, calm down a second," Chris began. "It's the middle of the day. We're 30 feet from my house, and even if it was a person, so what? It's some public woods. Anyone can come through here. It made some sense, and he was right about it being public. But then where were they? I glanced around one more time. However, the trees quickly layered up, and I couldn't see far out at all. I guessed it was possible for me to lose track of someone here in a short distance. Okay, I said. Man, I can stay alone in the house for weeks on end, but I can't handle a short walk through the woods on a summer's day? And that's why you brought some muscle? Declared Chris, wielding the lantern above his head, and I laughed. We spent the day walking around the forest and returned to the tent to get some water when we were too hot. We talked about school and what our plans were for the future. We talked about dreams we had, and ghosts, and creatures that lurked in the dark. Neither of us were too scared of things like that, but they made for good camping stories. Chris told a particularly good one of a woman who lived in the woods. She had the head of a cat, and if you heard a raspy meow, that meant she was trying to find you. If she stopped meowing, it signified you were found, and she was quickly making her way towards you. It made my skin crawl a little, and we stopped telling stories soon after that. The light of the day eventually faded, and it was getting hard to see, so we headed back to the tent for the night. An impressive heat the day had killed our appetites, so we left the food for now and decided to eat it in the night if we got hungry. Chris held the electric lantern at the front of the tent, flicking it on as he did so. It was surprisingly bright and spilled a yellow light on the ground and into the trees that faced us. The warm glow looked dramatic, but whatever was beyond the light was hidden in the blackness. Our immediate area was clear, but after a few paces, the light seemed to stop dead. It looked weird. Chris ducked his head under the tent, opening it, and I followed him. The sleeping bags looked inviting as the heat from earlier had gone, and it was too cold for shirts and shorts. We got inside, and I took the lantern from earlier and brought it into the tent. "Can you hear meowing?" I said, my head tilted as I strained to hear. "Yeah, I hear some bullshit too." Chris smiled and I zipped up his sleeping bag. "Damn, I thought I had him." Oh well, I zipped up my own bag and we laid there talking for a little while. Then the exhaustion of such a hot summer hit us, and we fell asleep. I had a dream that we were walking to Chris's house again, but there were more trees than before, and it was getting dark very quickly. I blinked and suddenly it was night, with the forest sprawling in every direction. The rope swing hung in front of me. I turned around and Chris was gone. I heard a creak behind me. A feeling came over me like I missed a step on the stairs. For some reason, I couldn't turn around. I started walking straight ahead. The rope swing slowly lifted itself up into the trees, and I watched it disappear. I walked over and stood beneath it where it had been, and there was a rustle above me. As I lifted my eyes to the canopy, a black figure with the head of a cat came hurtling downwards, its mouth open horrifically wide. One of its teeth touched my left eye, and I tore myself awake, gasping as I sat up in the tent. My back was damp with sweat, and Chris was asleep next to me. The lantern was still on, and I could see our backpacks at the end of the tent. I took a moment to breathe, and then let myself lay back down, my head thumping on the floor a little too hard. I winced and reached for the bottle of water down to my side, downing a few mouthfuls. I couldn't fall asleep with the glow of the lantern on my eyelids, so I sat up and searched the tent. I quickly realized the light was coming from outside. "Chris," I said, still confused from sleep. He mumbled something in reply. "Chris, where's the lantern?" Somewhere," he said slowly and sleepily before turning over. Looking around again, the light was obviously coming from the outside. I weighed up at the options. Either some murderer had snuck into our tent and done nothing but take the lantern outside, or we didn't actually bring it into the tent and I had remembered wrongly. It sounded more convincing, so I knelt by the tent door and unzipped it. From the opening I looked around. It was immediately obvious where the glow was coming from. Why couldn't I see it? I looked up. The lantern was resting 20 feet in the air, hanging in the dark. Goosebumps swept across my skin and I zipped up the door before shaking Chris. "Chris, please wake up." He heard the urgency in my voice and sat up. "What? What's wrong?" Chris said, rubbing his eyes. "The lantern's hanging outside." "But I brought it in," he reassured me. I felt sick as my reasoning broke. We both looked at the front of the tent. "We should go back to the house," I said, my resolve buckling. I was just a kid in the forest whose parents were away. "I'm not walking in the dark," he replied. Chris was now looking worried. We've got a lantern." I stopped myself. We looked at the door, then the front of the tent again. We couldn't sit there forever. We were going to get scared as we sat there doing nothing. So this was the plan. We weren't going back to sleep. We would get the lantern back somehow, leave everything here, and spend the night in Chris's house. I hated being the one to go first. I wanted to turn back even just crouching by the tent entrance. Unzipping the fabric door, I looked around. Nothing. I peered over the tent behind us. Nothing in sight. Literally nothing. Everything was black outside the tent. I took a step out, and it was cold. Chris said the same as he stood right by my side, looking over his shoulder. He turned back and saw the lantern in the air. "Oh my God." We stood there looking at it for a few seconds that seemed to crawl by. Eventually I worked out which tree it was hanging from. The broken rope swinging at my feet confirmed it. Way up out of reach, the lantern hung above our heads, tied to the other end of the rope that still dangled from the darkness. I could not work it out. It was too high up for even a ladder. The trees were thin and bare beside it, the leaves that made up to the canopy. There was nowhere to climb. Picking up the length of rope that had snapped off earlier, I bundled it up and tied a knot, and aimed at the lantern. I took a step back and jumped. Tossing it into the air, it caught the lantern on its side and sent it swinging. It threw shadows rocking around us. I suddenly wished it had hit it. The light made the shadows lean from the side to side of the lantern. The horrible, unnatural swaying made me panic, and my eyes became wet with fear. That fear took solid hold of me. I picked up the rope again and lobbed it desperately at the lantern. I missed, and the bundle of rope sailed off into the darkness. Helplessly, I turned to Chris, who had already grabbed his backpack. He span around and threw it with a yelp, and it hit the lantern dead on. It fell and thudded to the floor with a crack, but the light was still on. I ran to pick it up. I turned to Chris and almost cried with relief. "Okay, let's go. We need to leave now," I urged, and he started jogging quickly towards his house. As I followed, we half ran, half stumbled off into the dark, checking over our shoulders and working up ourselves, as our thoughts were consumed by everything that could be waiting in the trees for us. I don't know how long we were moving, but it soon became apparent that it was Chris's house. It was not in the direction we were heading. "For God's sake, where is it?" Chris said, tension taking hold of his voice. "We'll have to go to the tent and try again." A couple of tears were forming at the corners of his eyes. They were probably on mine too, but my heart was thumping so hard I didn't notice. "Okay," I took a breath, and we turned around, heading in a straight line directly behind us. What if we didn't find the tent? I couldn't stop myself thinking that over and over as we retraced our steps. We walked for what seemed like twice as long before the light finally fell on the side of the tent. We ran up and closed to its side, looking around to try and figure out which direction we should go. The silence was at the top and built up a nightmare right before some horrible thing lurches at you, screaming. The comparison made me gag, and I scrunched my eyes shut, the hair on my skin lifting. My temples were so hot it felt like my brain was thudding against my skull. I couldn't begin to guess where the house was. We could see about 10 feet from the lantern, then pitch black. There were no clues. Every direction looked wrong. Chris took the lantern from me and walked in a small circle, straining his eyes to try and see. I stayed put. "Chris, turn it off," I whispered to him hurriedly. "What?" he asked. I stepped quickly and quietly towards him, bringing my face to him. "There's something in the tent." His gaze shifted past me towards the tent, and there stood staring. We were standing upon the left-hand side of the tent, and from this angle I could see just about the unzipped door hanging open, but I remembered leaving it that way. So that wasn't what was making me clench my teeth together. A few feet away, my rucksack sat out on the dry earth, with the food I'd packed now neatly arranged trailing from it. Our sleeping bags were also nicely laid out, end to end, making the line of belongings lead straight into the mouth of a tent. I took a careful step forward. The light could pass more easily through the fabric. It couldn't have been a trick of the light. Something big and dark was obviously crouched, with what I guessed its front facing the door open. I hated myself for not seeing it sooner. Didn't move at all, or seem to breathe. Just sat, waiting for us to investigate the display it had made. "Turn it off," I whispered again. Chris continued staring deaf to me. "Chris," I pleaded in a whisper. A voice nearby joined in. "Chris." We both heard it, and the blood fell in our veins. It came from the tent. A slow, strained rasp of a voice that sounded like a parrot copying a new word. The sound clicked across my skin and crept into my ears. The light flicked off with a click that was too loud. Chris grabbed my shoulder, and I clenched my fists closed, painfully tight. We stood there in complete darkness. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to stay. My brain fought for control as my legs waited for a decision rooted in place. We breathed shallow, quiet breaths, blackness pressing on our eyes like water. Sweat ran down my neck. I couldn't see the tent.
"Chris, turn it off."
My stomach flipped inside out as the thing in the tent played with my words. I quickly grabbed Chris's hand, yanking him in the opposite direction. I ran like I had never before. Chris's legs thudded alternately with mine. The sprint continued for about a minute. We lost ourselves as we ran through the absolute darkness. I forgot where we were, and I couldn't see what was in front of my face. I ran head-on into a tree, and my forehead struck its side with a sickening, hollow knock. Sparks lit up inside my eyes as I choked back the pain. It hurt so much I couldn't breathe. Chris tried to pull me on it, but I buckled to the floor on my knees and threw up as I collapsed onto my back and my head went numb. Chris lifted me up. "Please, don't stop, please," he begged. I couldn't reply. "Please, please, keep going." I forced my legs to take my weight as I locked my knees upright. Leaning on Chris, my body felt empty and a little blood rolled down my forehead and into my brow. I wiped it away as I tried to grasp the situation again, but the pain was too much. "Wait, I can't," I begged. Just wait. We stood together in the inky woods, but we couldn't have been anywhere. I could see Chris as he huddled next to me. It didn't feel like the darkness. It felt like someone had wrapped my head in a blanket. Neither of us said a word as we waited, but our breathing was loud, and I wondered from what distance it could be heard. Reality began to return to me, and the pain now was just about bearable. I straightened up, grasping at what was happening. The pins of fear sank into me for a second time, and I started counting in my head. 1 minute passed without any sound in the world. The wind was dead, and the birds maybe too. Another minute went by. I continued counting. 3 minutes. We were still alone. Was it even looking for us? I reached for Chris's arms in the dark. He jumped when I touched it, but I steadied him with the other. He was still holding the lantern. Good. We had light on our side. Now if only we could use it. I went over to the vent, hurriedly in my mind. The lantern was now hanging from a tree. We got out of the tent and couldn't find our way home. By the time we returned to the tent, something was in it. But then why did it take the lantern and do nothing while we slept? If it was sheer luck that we were alone and we were trying to get the lantern, I wondered just how small of the possibility was of us getting a second chance. I stayed silent for a moment and then whispered as best as I could. Chris, we need to turn on the lantern. We need to fucking get away from here. We can make a run into your house, but we need to see. No, please, we have to stay here. Chris tried to whisper too. We can't wait for morning if we have to. You can't turn it on. I could hear his voice that a sob was breaking through. Just keep quiet. You fucking have to, please. I parted my lips to try again, but as I did, I heard something. A very faint clicking sound from where in the dark. It was almost inaudible, but it was there. A regular, stunning clicking sound. It all sounded like fingernails on a wooden table, and it was moving. It came from in front of us, I was sure of it. A steady click, click, click. Filled my ears as we watched, and we tried to look in the distance. It was drawing closer. It stopped. I was glad for the first time in my life I couldn't see what was waiting in the dark. Perhaps that meant we were also hidden. As my thoughts fired off in every direction, I gave the thing in the darkness the image of a cat-headed woman, and it terrified me. I was just waiting to hear that meow, but my ears were meant with something else.
Chris.
I tensed my throat and tried not to cry.
Chris.
I said his name twice, and I kept my hand over my mouth. This horrible, scraping dialogue sounded a few steps away. The words were said oddly with no meaning behind them. They were just sounds that this thing had picked up, and now using them to catch us out in the dark. Chris let go of my hand, and I heard his foot plant softly in the grass behind him and prepared to run. Don't you dare! I tried to project into his mind. Don't you make a sound.
Chris, please.
It sounded so wrong, drawn out like a door slowly opening. Chris let out a whimper as it called him. I froze and waited for something, anything to happen. It was a long silence, and I held my breath for as long as I could. I couldn't wait anymore. Very slowly I reached out to Chris and put my hand on his shoulder, and we both lifted our feet and managed to step away without making a sound. We stepped away from the voice and didn't stop moving, but ever so carefully. So slowly, so slowly. I didn't care how long it would take us to get somewhere. If it took us an hour every step we were going to get out. Chris backed into a tree and gasped audibly. The clicking started up immediately. It rolled on, constantly moving towards us. I didn't know what to do. All I could think of was to screw my eyes shut and not to scream. As we stood there, the clicking came to a stop. An arm's length away from where we stood. Silence. Chris, turn Turn it on. Please. Fear took over. Chris switched on the light and tore off in the other direction without looking behind him. I wheeled in place and held that lantern in my sight like nothing else existed. I didn't dare look at the thing, but we could hear it. Our footsteps thudded on the grass, and the thing pursued us with a tap, 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 now scurrying like little claws on hard earth. As I ran desperately to catch up to the light, the sound suddenly rose up behind me and over my head in between the trees. This wasn't happening. It was going to drop down on us. Turn! I screamed. I didn't care anymore. If we were going to get out of this with our lives, we were going to have to run for it. We suddenly changed course. The tapping stopped for a moment, long enough for us to gain a few feet before it came in our direction again. My legs were crampling horribly and Chris was gasping hard. We couldn't keep this up. Where were we? I saw the light from the lantern come to an abrupt halt. I didn't have time to stop for this, and braced myself to thump into Chris. The light passed beneath my feet. He dropped the lantern. I turned my head and watched it recede into the darkness. It was immediately too far for me to go back. The thing would be on me in a second. Chris! I was crying and sweeping tears from my cheeks as I ran, preparing my face to keep in contact with the tree at any moment. Keep going, I heard Chris from up ahead. There's a light. My vision was blurry from the trees and tears, but could see it, an orange glow hanging in the air in the distance. Another one? What was happening? I wanted to scream at him to avoid it, but I realized it was a street light. My legs felt like I was running through water, but I pushed through them harder like the goal in sight. Gradually and painfully the light drew closer, as did the clicking. The thing could move like nothing I knew. I saw Chris' figure pass underneath the tree light, and then he was gone again. Don't stop! I yelled as I approached the edge of the forest, and my legs adjusted to the forest floor. I gave way to solid footing. I could see rows of more streetlights heading off to the right, and Chris' figure was passing regularly underneath each. When I was sure I was completely out of the trees, I did not stop. I ran underneath every streetlight. I ran under so many streetlights, putting as much distance as I could manage between us and the edge of the woods. I realized after a while that the clicking had stopped. I needed to see that we were okay. I turned my head and looked back along the row of lights, keeping my gaze on the first light. My pace slowed as the pain in my head and legs came back. There was a silence once more, and the lights revealed an empty pathway. I jogged on and kept my eyes on the glow, expecting to see something at any minute. It lit up with nothing but the concrete and the edge of the road. Is it there? The question pulsed in my mind over and over again. Is it there? As I turned my head to continue catching up to Chris, I caught sight of something pass under the first street light. An alarming shock went through me as if my fears were confirmed. I let out a cry and picked up the pace once more, sprinting between the lights. The image burned my mind. I hardly caught a glimpse of the thing, but it was white and massive. It almost brushed the street lights as it went under it. It had a long, uptight body full of kinks, like it had just unfolded itself. And that's all I was able to tell. It must have had a face and limbs, but I had no time to see. I didn't look again. The pathway gives more way to lights, and I could soon see I was in the glow of the windows in some houses either side of the road. I recognized where we were, close to my house, by some miracle. A little further and we would be there. My house, I yelled, and Chris listened, turning left onto the side street and dashing down. With panic on my side, I reached the turning and turned and looked down the street to see Chris jumping the fence into my garden. Hurry up! And I heard him scream. Reaching the fence, I planted my hands on top. hoisting myself up and over, and shredding my elbows in the process. My ankles stung as I headed into the garden and sprinted towards the kitchen door. Chris stepped aside, gasping for air as I fumbled the key into the lock and wrenched it sideways. We both flew into the kitchen and slammed the door behind us. I locked it from the inside. We both sprinted upstairs to the bathroom, locking it behind us. "What was that?" I managed to say in a panic whisper, wondering if it could get in. "Did you see it?" "No." Chris crouched in the window, letting tears roll. "It was so tall. I couldn't." "Don't tell me." Chris cut me off. I mulled it over again and again as we sat there. Minutes slowly ticked by into hours. My head was fizzing all the while, and I could still hear its voice. The disgusting voice. My elbows and forearms were sticky with blood, and we both looked at the floor, the occasional sob coming from the two of us. Our hearts banged in our chests, and we spent the night that way. Light streamed in from the window. We didn't unlock the bathroom door until noon. We crept downstairs. The kitchen door was still locked, and nothing was in the house. I looked out in the living room window. Another perfect day. No people walked by. The sprinklers were on, and I could hear birds again. It helps to calm our nerves. "That tent can stay there," I said at last. "Yeah," Chris agreed. We stayed in the living room for the TV off all day. We didn't know what to do, and talked about if we should call the police or something. The day crawled by as we talked and tried to rake our thoughts together and think of what to do next. By all that went through my mind was what happened and just happened now, and that not what we should be doing. By the time it was dark around 9 p.m. the phone rang. It was Chris's parents asking if I had seen him. They were getting worried, and they had just got back from out of town. I let them know he was okay, and asked if they could come pick us up, both of us up, from my house, because something had happened. They wanted to know what, but I said we'll tell them both when they got here. They said they'd be here soon. Relief washed over us as adults were on the way to make everything alright. They would believe us. We didn't lie about these things. Even if they're skeptical, they'd at least believe that some dangerous animal was in the forest, and that was good enough for us. I went into the kitchen to get some juice from the fridge, and I realized I hadn't had a drink all day. I could hear the water dripping in the sink, so I turned the faucet tighter and gulped some juice. As I headed towards the living room, the water started to tap again. I flicked the light on and realized it wasn't coming from the sink, or anywhere in the room for that matter. It sounded like it was coming from further away. I looked out into the garden and could see just a fuzzy, tall silhouette leaning up against the back fence in the dark. Actually, the tapping sounded more like clicking. The figure slowly moved from the fence and clicked across the grass towards the house.